Hey folks, Curtis Stone here. We are going to carry on our video series where we're exploring all of the states and provinces of North America and figuring out or looking at good places to be, places to avoid, and things to consider. So today we're going to be looking at the great state of Michigan. And there's a lot of good places in Michigan, actually. Michigan is a quite underappreciated state as far as homesteading is concerned. I find that in our Homestead Accelerator program, we find regularly good value of places in Michigan, and particular parts which we'll talk about, places that we want to avoid and such. But politics aside of the state, it's a pretty good state to be in, as long as you're not in Detroit and in some of the major metropolitan areas. Let's just talk about right now, places to avoid. If you're out of these main metropolitan areas where there's just so much infrastructure, right? I mean, it's like I say all the time is, there's a direct correlation between the amount of concrete and the amount of government, to the amount of government. And that is certainly the case in the southern part of Michigan, going through all this massive amounts of people that live in this area of the United States, from Chicago, through Indianapolis, to Columbus, Cleveland, Detroit, tons of people, so many highways, interstates, and then everything in between is peri-urban. It's just gridded of not rural, but peri-urban. It's mostly farms. This isn't necessarily big ag country, though there is some big ag through here. Big ag in the United States is really these areas, Iowa, Nebraska, South Dakota, Minnesota, parts of Wisconsin. That's like the big ag zone of the Midwest. Of course, on the West Coast, it's the Central Valley of California. But there's not a ton of big ag here. There is some, and you can see that as evidenced in just some of the fields and just the monocropping and stuff that's happening here. So you definitely don't want to be in these areas. But just, the cities themselves, between Flint and Lansing and Detroit, this is just the massive urban jungle. I've flown airplanes many times over these areas at nighttime, and it's a trip because you're like, whoa, city. There's just so much there. So those are the areas you don't want to be. And then certainly you get a little bit more urban densification up here, but not as bad. I would say, this one maybe isn't as bad to avoid areas in here than it is down here. I would say in Michigan in general, you just don't want to be down here as far as homesteading is concerned. Now, and again, in these videos, don't take all this personally. People always chime in and they're like, hey, well, I live here and it's not so bad, or I live there and it sucks and you said it's good. And take it with a grain of salt. We're trying to be broad and just give you some principles and food for thought when you're considering where you want to be ideally in any of these places that we're looking at. So Upper Mitten in Michigan is actually amazing. There's a ton of good value up here. We see good properties here all the time. What's really common up in this northern part of Michigan are recreational properties that are, somebody does hunting, and they've got a cabin and it's out on a 10 to 100 acres or even more. And they go out there and they go hunting, and there's tons of space, and it's quite rural. I mean, even when you drive through, I've driven through Sault Ste. Marie here into the northern tip of Michigan, and it's very, very rural. There's not a lot of stuff up here, which is generally speaking the case for most places on the northern part of the United States that are touching Canada. It's really, really rural. Like there's not a lot going on out here. And as far as bugging out, it's a great place to be because it's way out of the way. It's cold. But you can have a great growing season up in here. I would say, up here is a lot colder. Like even just coming down south into this part of Michigan is going to be a lot warmer than up here. Generally, the Great Lakes are colder. Bordering the Great Lakes will, any amount of water will make your climate more stable in some way or another. But I find, especially up here, if you've ever been to Sault Ste. Marie or around here, it's pretty cold. Like springtime's cold too. It takes a while for it to warm up. But the more interior you come, you're gonna get more of that shelter from the ocean, and it's going to be a little bit warmer in here. There's a high water table in Michigan. A lot of places have, with all these tiny little lakes, have basements that flood and stuff like that. So you really got to consider that when you're thinking about looking at places in Michigan. But let's look at some good areas in the state as well. Some places that we might have seen good properties in the past and just good value. So one thing you notice about this little zone here is that it's between the Highway 10, 127, and the Interstate 75. And so it doesn't have any major highways going through it, meaning that there's a little bit less traffic in that place. So that can be a good thing, right? But, when you come into a spot like this, where you want to look are not in the fields, but are on the edges or in the trees. I say to people, generally speaking, when it comes to homesteading and getting out of the way, there's two things you want to consider. High ground and trees. Really, plainly, we can drill down to the details. But plainly speaking, those are things that you want to look for, is high ground and trees. If it's high ground, you want to have topography on your property. Just flat property is never great. A little bit of topography is good. So sometimes in these flats, they're not so great. Trees often accompany riparian areas, which are areas of vegetation that follow bodies of water. And in areas like that, you're going to see more topography as you get close to water bodies, because as moving water bodies, as you know, erode soil. And so it creates depressions, but it also creates topography, creates water tributaries and stuff. So those are often going to be sweet spots. Like, let's just zoom into a random spot here. Like, imagine if this was let's just draw out a property here. This looks like it might be an easement because of that, but it doesn't make any sense. But either way, let's just draw and pretend that this is, maybe this is a property right here. 10 acre. That's a 10 acre spread in Michigan. So I'd come in here and I'd say, all right, house is offset from the road. That's good. There's good access in. Is it maybe this is an easement to other neighbor's property or whatnot, and that's also your driveway? That's all right. As long as it's not a driveway to somebody else's. But if it is, it's on the edge of your property, which is better than it going through the center. So that's not so bad there. You've got these look like they're undergrazed. This is logged at some point, and then this is just regen basically, and they left some of the bigger trees, which is nice. You've got a little field in there. You could get going. I'd be looking for a pond. I don't see a pond in here, but you could probably make one. Looking at the topography a little bit here. You know what? If you were to make a pond, right down here would be the spot to do it. Michigan gets tons of rain, and so this would shed all the way down here, so you could collect some stuff there. You've also got a little bit of, it comes up here a little bit, so this sheds down in there. So yeah, you might consider building a pond there. But that's kind of these kinds of places that you see in Michigan. You also see just random big tracts. People are selling these kind of recreational properties up in zones like this. So those are good places to look. Coming to some of the other spots. Good spots rurally. This is cold, as I was saying, but there's little towns by for amenities, and, you can be closer to some of these, but if you had to commute to some of the bigger spots, like in Traverse City, you could do that. It's not that far, The good thing about the United States is the highway systems they're a lot better than they are in Canada. I can tell you that. And you can get around a lot quicker in the U.S. with these interstate highways than you can in Canada with the Highway 1 that we have, at least the one that's across Canada. So some good spots here on the lakes, in the trees, with these little lake zones in here. I prefer to be off the Great Lake. That would be my preference. Unless you're really into fishing or something. But this lake's cold, and it's only really that enjoyable for a fairly small part of the year. I'd rather be interior. personally. But then up on the western side of Michigan here, we've found a lot of good properties over the years up in these zones. Really, really good spots. So this area has been circled because you kind of have access to these medium-sized towns, which are good because they're going to have your Lowe's or Home Depots or probably some of the amenities that you might need. If you're getting a homestead going, you've got some of the amenities that you need, but you're not near any big metropolitan areas. Same up here. This might be a neat little microclimate on this part of the lake. I think there might be some temperature variation differences between the Great Lakes, but I just know they're generally kind of cold. They're nice in the summer, but generally they're kind of cold. But these areas here, you're tucked away. You're and it comes down to value. Like we find properties up here. You could buy a homestead with a house, a pond, trees, pastures for 200, 300 grand. We see it all the time. What you want to look for when you're out in some of these rural areas is pay attention to where the airports are. I've found a number of Michigan properties over the years that people send me that just you're close to airports, and you never want to be in a path of an airplane, because then you'll always hear airplanes going over you or close to you, and it's unsettling. It's not nice. So always pay attention to that when anywhere you're looking. Always pay attention to that. I've just seen a number of them over the years up here. Michigan is a fairly populated state, but it's all down here, and that's more like where you're going to see all kinds of airports in these towns. Is any of these towns, a lot of these places have airports, and you're just going to see planes coming in and out. So, but yeah, Michigan's a great state. There's a lot of good value up here, and people often assume that it's not great because of its politics. But I think to get hung up on the politics of a state it's kind of a red herring, because the politics exist where the infrastructure is. What I always say is, where the money flows, the policy goes. And it's much like it's reflected in the concrete. Because concrete costs money. Concrete's a reflection of economics. And so where there's more concrete is where there's more policy, where there's more people, and there's more money. And that's where the policy goes. So when you're hidden out in these spots up in these parts of the state, you don't see it. And there's a lot of trees. Like Michigan's a green place. There's a ton of trees. Like, look at all this. This is mostly green. This is as rural as you can get in the United States, pretty much. Maine might be a little bit more rural actually, but this is rural. You come up here, man, it's as rural as just on the other side of Canada, just on the other side of here. It's as rural as Northern Ontario. This is rural up here. You got to think about the bugs, though. That's the one thing about these spots, and Michigan's the same thing. All these little lake areas here. It's buggy in the summer. So, and that buggy season lasts for quite a while, because this part of the U.S. you get rain in the summer. This is a boreal climate, but it's a lot wetter of a boreal because it's on the verge of temperate, and because in the United States, the temperate region is this area here, basically from eastern Texas all the way through Florida, up through Pennsylvania, North South Carolina, Virginia, southern Ohio. This is all temperate, and then this gets up into the boreal regions. But because it's close to the temperate regions, and it has a lot of Great Lakes around here, which is a lot of moisture. That's why it's so humid out here in the summer, and it's dry where I live. Like I'm out here. I don't have the lakes. You guys got so many lakes out here, so it's humid in the summer, and there's a high water table, so there's all these little lakes. It's buggy, so you have to take that into consideration. You have many months of buggy season, which sometimes makes it uncomfortable to garden. But there's microclimates everywhere. I'd say the less marshy you are, so say for example in here, this isn't as marshy in this little zone as coming up around here where some of these smaller lakes are in this area here. This would be pretty marshy. Getting close to this Halton Lake, this is going to be buggy for a good period of time. And so if you're a little higher and drier, you're going to have less bugs. Again, going back to that high and dry thing. But the nice thing about being in the trees in these rural areas like this, opposed to these peri-urban areas like this, is that there's just agricultural chemicals and industry around here, and there's less of it in these rural areas. So food for thought on the great state of Michigan. But yeah, again, we've seen a ton of value in this state over the years. And I mentioned the Homestead Accelerator. I also have a course that I created called Find Your Perfect Homestead Property. And in this course, I basically show you how to evaluate properties, just like I do, looking at topography, using tricks on Google Earth. And there's a webinar you can attend. There's a link for it in the video. And I go through my 3 secrets to how to find ideal homestead properties. And it's all about a course that I have on this same subject. So you can go check that out if that interests you. And let me know in the comments. What do you guys want to see next? I'm kind of queuing up these states as I see. I had a lot of comments on Michigan. So there it is. But where do you guys want me to go next? Leave a comment in the show notes or down below the show notes there. And I'll see you guys in the next one.